Tanya Robinson had worked as a security guard for Midtown Plaza for over a decade. She was known around the building as Miss Tanya, always greeting everyone with a bright smile and a kind word. It wasn't the kind of job she had envisioned for herself when she was younger, but after raising two children on her own and facing countless challenges, she had found a steady role and a sense of purpose. Over the years, she had become the unofficial face of the building's security, handling everything from checking badges to diffusing tense situations. Her role wasn't glamorous, and it certainly didn't come with a hefty paycheck, but Tanya was proud of what she did. She knew that her presence helped keep the building safe, and that meant something to her. One morning, as she was doing her rounds, she noticed a group of employees gathered in the lobby. They were laughing and chatting, but as she approached, their laughter seemed to grow louder. Tanya could hear snippets of their conversation, and it didn't take long for her to realize that she was the subject of their jokes. "Can you believe she's been here for, what, 10 years now?" One of them snickered. "Yeah, and she thinks she's so important. She's just a security guard," another added with a sneer. Tanya had heard it all before, and while the comments stung, she had long since developed a thick skin. She had dealt with people underestimating her for most of her life. She simply straightened her back, walked by with her head held high, and continued with her work. However, as she walked away, she couldn't help but feel a small pang of anger and sadness. She knew she deserved more respect than they were giving her, but she had learned to let those feelings go. Later that afternoon, an unexpected meeting with the CEO, Mr. Henry Lawrence, changed everything. He was a powerful man, known for his ruthless business tactics and stern demeanor. Tanya had seen him around the building before, but he'd never spoken to her directly. She was surprised when he approached her, requesting a private conversation in his office. "Miss Robinson," he began, "I've been reviewing the security protocols around the building, and I must say I'm impressed with your work. I understand you've been here for over a decade. That kind of loyalty and dedication is rare." Tanya was taken aback. It wasn't often that she received praise, especially from someone in his position. She felt a sense of pride welling up inside her. "Thank you, Mr. Lawrence. I take my job seriously, and I try to do my best every day." He nodded approvingly. "That's exactly what I like to hear. In fact, I'm considering some changes to the building security team, and I'd like to discuss some ideas with you." Over the next few weeks, Tanya found herself meeting with Mr. Lawrence more and more frequently. They discussed the security protocols, reviewed footage, and even made plans to upgrade some of the building's outdated equipment. Tanya was thrilled to be involved in these discussions, and for the first time in a long time, she felt truly valued in her role. However, not everyone in the building shared her excitement. Rumors began to spread among the staff that Tanya was receiving special treatment. Some employees, including the ones who had mocked her before, started to resent her newfound involvement with the CEO. They accused her of being a teacher's pet and made snide remarks behind her back. Tanya tried to ignore them, but the negativity was hard to shake off. One day, while reviewing security footage, Tanya noticed something unusual. A senior executive, Mr. Jameson, was seen sneaking into the building after hours and accessing sensitive files on one of the company's computers. Tanya knew she couldn't ignore this, so she immediately reported the incident to Mr. Lawrence. "Are you certain about this?" he asked, his face tense. "Yes, sir. The footage doesn't lie," she replied, her voice steady. Mr. Lawrence sighed and ran a hand through his hair. "This could be a serious breach of trust. Thank you for bringing this to my attention, Tanya. I'll handle it from here." Tanya nodded and returned to her duties, but she couldn't shake the feeling that something big was about to happen. Sure enough, the next morning, Mr. Jameson was escorted out of the building by security. News spread quickly, and soon everyone knew that Tanya had been the one to uncover his misconduct. The same people who had mocked her before were now looking at her with a mixture of fear and respect. But Tanya's role in the building was about to take an even more unexpected turn. As word spread of Mr. Jameson's abrupt departure, the building was abuzz with rumors. The same employees who had laughed at Tanya just days before now regarded her with a mix of awe and caution. She felt the shift in their behavior immediately. They stopped talking when she walked by, avoided eye contact, and even whispered behind her back. Some employees began showing her newfound respect, while others continued to sneer, convinced that she had somehow tricked Mr. Lawrence into trusting her. Tanya, however, stayed focused on her work, brushing off the comments and stares. Despite the tension, she was proud of what she had done. She knew she had made the right decision by reporting Mr. Jameson, even if it meant being the subject of more gossip. One afternoon, Mr. Lawrence summoned her to his office once again. She took a deep breath and made her way to the top floor, wondering what he wanted to discuss this time. As she entered his office, she noticed a serious expression on his face. "Miss Robinson," he began, his tone unusually grave, "I need to ask you something important. The situation with Mr. Jameson has highlighted a much larger problem within the company. We need someone who can help us uncover any additional issues, someone with integrity and a keen eye. I'd like you to take on a special assignment." Tanya's eyes widened. "A special assignment, sir?" "Yes," he replied, leaning forward. "I need someone on the inside, someone who can blend in and observe without drawing too much attention. You've proven yourself to be trustworthy and diligent. I believe you're the perfect person for this job." Tanya was taken aback. The idea of taking on a more significant role within the company was both thrilling and intimidating. She'd never considered herself anything more than a security guard, but now she was being offered a chance to make a real impact. Still, she hesitated. "Sir, I appreciate your confidence in me, but I'm not sure I'm qualified for this kind of responsibility." Mr. Lawrence smiled. "You're more qualified than you think, Miss Robinson. You've been here for over a decade. You know this building and its people better than anyone else. Plus, I'll make sure you have all the support you need." Tanya took a deep breath and nodded. "All right, sir. I'll do my best." Over the next few weeks, Tanya began her undercover role, blending into the background as she observed the comings and goings of employees throughout the building. She quickly realized that Mr. Jameson's actions were just the tip of the iceberg. She witnessed instances of mistreatment, discrimination, and unethical behavior that shocked her. She documented everything carefully, reporting back to Mr. Lawrence as she gathered evidence. With each discovery, she felt a renewed sense of purpose. She was determined to make a difference, not just for herself, but for everyone who worked in the building. She wanted to create a safer, fairer environment for everyone, regardless of their position or background. However, her investigations were not without risk. Word began to spread that Tanya was up to something, and certain employees grew suspicious of her constant presence. Some even began to confront her, questioning her motives and accusing her of spying on them. One day, as she was walking through the lobby, a group of executives blocked her path. One of them, a tall man with a sneer on his face, crossed his arms and glared at her. "We know what you're doing, Miss Robinson," he said coldly. "You think you're some kind of hero, don't you? You think you can just waltz in here and make changes? You're nothing but a security guard." Tanya stood her ground, meeting his gaze with unwavering determination. "I may be just a security guard, but I'm doing what's right. I'm not afraid of you or anyone else in this building." The man's sneer faltered, and he took a step back, clearly taken aback by her confidence. The other executives muttered among themselves, unsure of how to respond. Tanya walked past them without another word, her heart pounding, but her resolve stronger than ever. That evening, she met with Mr. Lawrence to discuss her findings. She shared her concerns about the culture within the company, explaining how employees felt powerless and undervalued. Mr. Lawrence listened intently, nodding as she spoke. "Thank you for your hard work, Miss Robinson," he said finally. "You've opened my eyes to issues I never realized existed. I promise you we'll make the necessary changes." Tanya felt a surge of relief. She had been worried that her efforts would go unnoticed, but Mr. Lawrence's words reassured her that she was making a difference. She left his office that night with a sense of hope, knowing that she was helping to create a better future for everyone in the building. But the challenges were far from over. As she continued her work, she encountered even more resistance, and soon she found herself facing a difficult decision, one that would test her courage and determination in ways she had never imagined. The next day, Tanya arrived at work to find a note slipped under the door of the security office. It was unsigned, written in block letters, "Stop now or you'll regret it." She stared at the note for a moment, a chill running down her spine. She knew this job would be challenging, but she hadn't expected threats. Taking a deep breath, she folded the note and slipped it into her pocket. She wasn't about to let intimidation stop her. Later that day, she approached Mr. Lawrence with the note. He examined it, his face darkening as he read. "This is unacceptable," he said, his voice hardening. "Miss Robinson, I assure you, we'll get to the bottom of this. In the meantime, I want you to know that you have my full support." Tanya nodded, feeling a mix of gratitude and apprehension. She had become accustomed to standing up for herself, but it was comforting to know that someone in a position of power had her back. Still, she was determined not to let fear dictate her actions. She returned to her duties with renewed focus, keeping a careful eye on the employees around her. As the days passed, she continued to gather information, speaking with employees who had suffered under the company's toxic culture. She learned of others who had been threatened, passed over for promotions, and belittled by executives. Each story fueled her resolve, and she compiled a growing list of complaints to present to Mr. Lawrence. One evening, she was approached by a young woman named Sarah, who worked in the administrative department. Sarah's face was pale, and her hands shook as she spoke. "Miss Robinson, I heard about what you're doing. I, I wanted to tell you what happened to me." Tanya listened as Sarah shared her story. She had been harassed by a senior executive, forced to endure months of inappropriate comments and unwanted advances. When she had finally spoken up, she was reprimanded and told to keep quiet if she valued her job. Sarah's story was heartbreaking, and Tanya felt a surge of anger on her behalf. "You did the right thing by coming to me, Sarah," Tanya said, placing a comforting hand on her shoulder. "We're going to make sure they can't get away with this anymore." As she continued her investigation, Tanya began to notice that certain employees seemed particularly hostile. They would glare at her as she walked by, mutter under their breath, and make snide comments when they thought she couldn't hear. She realized that her efforts were threatening the status quo, and those who benefited from the company's toxic environment were beginning to feel the heat. One day, as she was leaving work, she found her car vandalized. The tires had been slashed and the windows shattered. It was clear that someone wanted to send her a message, but she refused to be intimidated. She filed a report with the police and notified Mr. Lawrence, who expressed his outrage and assured her that the company would cover the cost of the repairs. Despite the setbacks, Tanya pressed on. She knew that the work she was doing was important, and she was determined to see it through. She continued to meet with employees, documenting their stories and compiling evidence of the company's toxic culture. With each new piece of information, she felt a growing sense of purpose. One evening, as she was reviewing her notes in the security office, she heard a knock on the door. She looked up to see Mr. Lawrence standing there, a serious expression on his face. "Miss Robinson, I've been reviewing the information you've gathered," he said, stepping inside and closing the door behind him. "It's worse than I imagined. I had no idea that these things were happening under my watch." Tanya nodded, feeling a mix of relief and validation. She had worried that her efforts might go unnoticed, but Mr. Lawrence's words reassured her that she was making a difference. "I'm going to take this information to the board," he continued. "We'll be conducting a thorough investigation, and I want you to know that your role in this will not be forgotten. You've done a tremendous service to this company, Miss Robinson." Tanya felt a surge of pride. She had started this journey with the goal of making a difference, and now she was seeing the results of her hard work. But she also knew that the fight wasn't over. There were still employees who needed her help, and she was determined to continue her work until the company's culture had changed for good. As she watched Mr. Lawrence leave, she knew that she had found a new purpose. She was no longer just a security guard. She was a catalyst for change, a voice for those who had been silenced, and a symbol of hope for everyone who worked in the building. And she was ready to see this mission through to the end, no matter what challenges lay ahead. Tanya continued to gather testimonies and information from employees who wanted their voices heard. Each day, someone new approached her, each with a different story, but with a shared experience of mistreatment, discrimination, or abuse of power. As these stories poured in, they painted a vivid picture of a company culture that had allowed cruelty and corruption to fester for far too long. One evening, Tanya received another unexpected call. This time, it was from Janice, a young woman who had recently been promoted to a managerial role in the marketing department. Janice explained that she had been thrilled about the promotion, but her excitement had quickly faded as she began to uncover unethical practices within her department. "I didn't know who to trust, Tanya," Janice said, her voice trembling. Every time I tried to report something, I was told to keep quiet or risk my job. I felt trapped. But when I heard about what you were doing, I knew I had to speak up. Tanya listened patiently as Janice detailed instances of financial manipulation, fraudulent reporting, and cover-ups within her department. As Janice spoke, Tanya could sense the anguish in her voice. She knew how difficult it was to stand up against such practices, especially when they were entrenched in a company's culture. Janice, I can't thank you enough for sharing this with me, Tanya said, her voice filled with compassion. You're doing the right thing, and together we can make a real difference. As she ended the call, Tanya felt a renewed sense of determination. She was no longer just an observer. She was leading a movement within the company, a movement that was growing stronger with each passing day. She knew that the fight for justice was far from over, but she was prepared to face whatever challenges lay ahead. The next morning, Tanya met with the investigative team that Mr. Lawrence had assembled. They were a group of seasoned professionals, experienced in corporate investigations, and equipped to handle the complex web of deceit that had taken root within the company. As Tanya shared her findings, she saw the investigators exchange glances, clearly taken aback by the extent of the corruption they were about to unravel. Over the following weeks, Tanya worked closely with the investigators, providing them with the information she had gathered and assisting in interviews with other employees. Together, they began to uncover evidence that confirmed the stories Tanya had heard. They found records of financial mismanagement, fraudulent activities, and systematic discrimination that reached all levels of the company. As the investigation progressed, the pressure on the company's leadership grew. Executives and managers who had once been untouchable now found themselves under intense scrutiny. Some tried to distance themselves, claiming ignorance, while others attempted to shift the blame. But Tanya and the investigative team were relentless, determined to hold each individual accountable for their actions. One day, as Tanya was leaving the office, she was approached by Sarah, a junior employee who had recently joined the company. Sarah hesitated, glancing around nervously before speaking. "Miss Robinson, I just wanted to say thank you," Sarah said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I know I haven't been here long, but I've seen enough to know that this place needed someone like you. You're making a difference, and it gives people like me hope." Tanya smiled, touched by Sarah's words. She had taken on this fight for justice, but along the way, she had become an inspiration to others, a beacon of hope for those who had felt powerless within the company's walls. As she walked away, Tanya reflected on the journey she had undertaken. She knew that the investigation was far from over, and that there would be challenges ahead, but she felt a profound sense of purpose. She was no longer just a security officer. She was a voice for those who had been silenced, a force for change within a company that had long needed it. And as she prepared to continue the fight, she knew that she was not alone. She had the support of the employees who had come forward, the investigators who were committed to seeking the truth, and the countless individuals who had been inspired by her courage. Together, they were forging a path toward justice, one step at a time. The investigation was now making headlines. Media outlets began to cover the story, and the public's attention turned toward the company that had once appeared to be a prestigious institution. Stories of the alleged corruption and the brave actions of the employees coming forward, especially Tanya, captivated the audience. Tanya felt the weight of the situation grow heavier, yet the support from the public bolstered her spirit. Inside the company, tensions rose to a boiling point. Upper management held closed-door meetings, frantically trying to control the damage. They attempted to spin the story, blaming a few bad apples, and even tried to paint the investigation as a personal vendetta led by disgruntled employees. However, the overwhelming evidence that Tanya and the investigative team had collected was impossible to refute. One evening, Tanya received a call from Mr. Lawrence himself. His voice carried a hint of desperation that she had never heard before. "Tanya, I wanted to thank you for your work so far. It's been eye-opening, to say the least," he said, carefully choosing his words. "Thank you, Mr. Lawrence. I'm just doing what I believe is right," Tanya replied, maintaining her professionalism. "I respect that, but I need you to understand that this investigation could have serious consequences, not just for the company, but for everyone involved," he said, a thinly veiled threat lingering in his tone. Tanya held her ground. "I understand, sir, but I believe the truth is more important than any potential consequences." There was a pause before Mr. Lawrence spoke again. Very well. Just be careful, Tanya. There are people who might not be as understanding as I am. As the call ended, Tanya realized that Mr. Lawrence's message was clear. She was treading on dangerous ground, and not everyone would be as accommodating. But she had come too far to turn back now. She knew that she had the support of her fellow employees and the investigative team, and that was enough to keep her going. The next day, Tanya was approached by Jake, a senior manager who had previously avoided her throughout the investigation. He had always been one of Mr. Lawrence's closest allies, and his sudden approach caught her off guard. "Tanya, can we talk for a moment?" he asked, glancing around as if to ensure they were not being overheard. "Of course," she replied, curious about what he might have to say. They found a quiet corner, and Jake began to speak in a hushed tone. "Look, I know things have been tense lately, but I wanted you to know that I'm on your side. I've been watching you, and I admire your courage. I also have some information that could be useful to your investigation." Tanya studied him, sensing a sincerity she hadn't expected. "What kind of information?" she asked, cautious but intrigued. Jake hesitated before answering. "There are financial records, off-the-books accounts that Mr. Lawrence and a few others have been using to hide company funds. It's bad, Tanya, and it goes all the way to the top." Tanya's heart raced. This was the breakthrough she had been waiting for. "Are you willing to come forward with this information?" she asked, hoping he understood the gravity of his offer. Jake nodded, his expression resolute. "Yes, I've been complicit for too long, and it's time I did the right thing." With Jake's help, Tanya and the investigative team delved deeper into the company's finances. They uncovered a network of fraudulent transactions, illegal practices, and accounts that had been used to launder money. The corruption was more extensive than they had imagined, implicating not just Mr. Lawrence but several members of the executive team. As the evidence mounted, the investigative team prepared to present their findings to the authorities. The company, once a symbol of success and prestige, was now a house of cards on the verge of collapse. On the day of the official announcement, Tanya stood outside the company building, watching as reporters gathered, ready to broadcast the story to the world. She felt a mix of emotions: pride for what she had accomplished, relief that justice was being served, and a sense of sorrow for the many employees who would be affected by the company's downfall. As the lead investigator addressed the media, detailing the extent of the corruption and the charges that would be brought against those responsible, Tanya reflected on her journey. She had started as a security officer, often overlooked and underestimated, but she had proven that courage and integrity could make a difference, even in the face of overwhelming odds. And as the cameras flashed and the reporters' voices filled the air, Tanya knew that her fight for justice had only just begun. She was determined to continue advocating for those who had been wronged, to stand up against injustice, and to use her voice to inspire others to do the same. For Tanya, this was not just a victory over corruption. It was a testament to the power of resilience, and a reminder that even the most unlikely heroes can change the world. As Tanya stood before the building that had once been a symbol of prestige, she felt a surge of emotions flood over her. The company had been a cornerstone of the community, providing jobs, opportunities, and a sense of pride for the people who worked there. But beneath the surface lay a toxic undercurrent of corruption, greed, and exploitation. The final pieces of the investigation were presented to the authorities, and the company's executives, including Mr. Lawrence, were arrested. Charges of fraud, embezzlement, and conspiracy to cover up illegal financial dealings were brought against them. It was a turning point not only for the company, but for Tanya too. She had transformed from a humble security guard into a whistleblower who had risked everything to expose the truth. As the news broke, Tanya became an unsung hero. Employees who had once overlooked her as just security now saw her in a new light. They thanked her, some with tears in their eyes, for standing up when they felt powerless. Many of them shared stories of the mistreatment and unfair practices they'd endured for years, recounting moments of humiliation that were now finally being addressed. Tanya's courage had inspired them to find their own voices, and together they began advocating for changes within the industry. In the days that followed, the company dissolved. But from the ashes of its scandal, something remarkable happened. Former employees, Tanya included, united to start a new organization, one rooted in integrity, transparency, and respect for every worker, from entry-level staff to executive positions. Tanya was offered a leadership role within the new organization, a testament to her courage, and she accepted it with pride, knowing that she could now help shape a company that genuinely cared about its people. Months later, she found herself in a boardroom, seated at the head of a long table, looking out at a group of diverse, eager faces. They had come together to build something new, something better, and Tanya knew this was her chance to make a lasting impact. She shared her story with the new team, urging them to always remember the importance of integrity, empathy, and accountability. And as they set to work building a company that would honor those values, Tanya knew her journey was just beginning. Her story became a beacon of hope and resilience, reminding everyone that one person, regardless of their title or status, could indeed make a difference. And as Tanya reflected on how far she'd come, she knew that her greatest success was not in bringing down a corrupt company, but in lifting others up and paving the way for a future built on respect, fairness, and the unwavering pursuit of justice.